I want to introduce some of our panelists that are going to be sharing some insightful thoughts about fatherhood tonight. We have with us Terrell Starr, an associate editor for News One. We also have with us Barry Barrow, senior editor for the Urban Daily. Joining us as well will be Joe Gray. Joe is a contributing writer for News One. So let's get this conversation started. What does fatherhood mean to you?
Hi, Ray. Well, fatherhood, what that means is really being responsible for a youth, something that you're molding starting from, really infancy, really, prior to birth, into adulthood. You're responsible for making this person a functional member of society, someone who is well-rounded and well-grounded. That's not an easy thing to do. It never has been, but these days it's even harder because you have so many factors that are that fight you in not just fatherhood but parenthood, economics, social issues, so many things. But fatherhood is also a good thing because it gives you the chance to really be the person who molds so many. Um, I can't say that I'm a father yet, but I'm a son, and I know what it meant for me to have a dad. And I'm one of five kids who grew up on the west side of Detroit. And we didn't have just our one father; we had a community of fathers. We had a village of fathers. Um, so we know what fatherhood means, and and largely it means to have someone out there who's taking that responsibility and showing what a guy's role can be in a child's life.
Joe, let me stay with you for one more question. And I want to follow up because you do some work mentoring young people in Brooklyn. So, in that
Yes.
space where they don't have fathers, although you're not their dad, the idea of a communal father is around. Do you feel yourself filling that void?
Yes. Well, just like I'm coordinator of the Sigma Beta Club of Brooklyn, New York. It's a youth auxiliary Phi Beta Sigma fraternity, which I'm proud to say you and I are both members of. Um,
Yes, sir.
what we yes. What we do is provide mentoring and guidance for young men in our communities, and they need it. Now, there are some guys in our club, who do have active fathers, others, who do not. But bottom line, it's very necessary for a kid to see more than one male in his community, in his universe, as someone who can influence him and is doing right by other people. It's very important because there's a lot in our communities that can bring a young man down. There are drug dealers, there are gangs, there are so many people that can lead him the wrong way. So when a young boy sees a guy who is gainfully employed, who talks to women with respect, who treats people like they ought to be treated, and that's going to mean something to that young boy growing up. And because of that, he has your influence, which will eventually be stronger than other influences.
That's what we ultimately hope. Terrell, I want to come to you because you have a bit of an interesting story. Now, and forgive me for beginning to put some of your story out there to share, but perhaps the rest of us observing can hear it, receive it, grow, and be better from it. Tell us about your relationship with your father and how it has shaped you to be the man you are today.
Well, I met my father when I was 29 years old. I was a Fulbright scholar in Ukraine, age 29. I searched his name on Facebook. Several Chris Truesdales, which is his name, popped up, and I would say about five or six of them. I sent a message to each of the Chris Truesdales. I wasn't really expecting for either one to reply to me because think about it. You have a 29-year-old man, bearded, is contacting you from Ukraine, the former Soviet Union, to say, "Hey, you have a son out there that you don't know about, and if you want to claim me, let me know." And that's basically how the message went. But amazingly, my father, Chris Truesdale from the Bronx, actually replied to me and saying, "Yeah, I am your father." And the backstory on that was back in 1979, both my mother and father were in the U.S. Army. He was transferred to Korea. However, before he left, neither my mother nor my father knew that she was pregnant with me. So time passed. There was and they lost contact. So She gave birth to me, but my father had no idea that I was in this world. I ended up growing up in Detroit, Michigan, a really crime infested neighborhood. Grew up in a drug house, and I went through the travails of that experience. However, I had a really strong grandmother, and I was groomed and developed in that village community, as so many black men and women are. And I always had a longing, just wanting to know who my father was. I don't necessarily consider myself had a void in my heart because I had so much love and affection, but I was always curious. I was always wondering about that man out there, if he looked like me, what were some things that he could have taught me growing up. It was always there in my life.
And I'm glad that you made that point. Jerry, with that, let me come to you because, Jerry, you've kind of lived on both ends of the spectrum. And then when I say both ends of the spectrum, as a younger man growing up, you had experience with your father in your life, and now the creator has convened it in such a way where you have that to someone else. Tell the story better than I could, please.
Yes, I consider myself very lucky. I grew up in, Brooklyn, New York. Both of my parents, West Indian parents. My father's Guyanese, my mother's from Grenada, and um, they had me. When they got married the same year I was born, and had myself and my sister. And on December 3rd, 2002, I became a father a day before my fraternity's Founders Day. I am a proud alpha, and I was teasing my wife that she should have held on for one more day until my son could be born on Founders Day, but it didn't quite go down that way. And fatherhood has been amazing because I get to see my dad and myself every day, and I get this in my interactions with my kids. Things that he comes out involuntarily. One of his favorite phrases growing up was "Y'all got life too good," you know. And I find myself saying that to my kids instinctively when they act out, when they're complaining that the Netflix doesn't work or they can't find their iPads, and I'm like, "Y'all got life too good. Like, what's wrong?" And I said, "There goes my father talking again." So I've had the blessing to have him still be here and be in my sons and my daughter's lives. So it's been great.
Jerry, let me ask you this, a bit lightheartedly, admittedly. Do you ever find yourself retelling stories to your son and daughter, saying things like, "Oh, I had to walk 4 hours, 3 days, and 2 miles just to get a snack in the wintertime"?
All the time. The funny story I told my son is he asked me, why do they call movie phone? And I said, well, actually, it wasn't an app. It was actually a phone service where you had to call and find out how to get what time the movies were. And he said, are you kidding me? I'm like, yeah. I had some CDs in my car, and my daughter said, Daddy, what movies are on that? I'm like, movies? No, these are CDs, sweetheart. These play music. She said, really? I thought those were DVDs. So you can see what I'm up against right now with these two. My son's 11, my daughter's 5. So I find myself telling them all kinds of you don't know what it was like for me growing up stories all the time.
Let me move the conversation along a little bit. And as Terrell, I see you down there laughing at the jokes, and undoubtedly we all are laughing. But quite seriously, these are some experiences that you're not able to participate in, and you don't have the back in my days whenever the creator endows you with children. How have you been able to be mature enough not to have the void or hate that comes with losing an important facet of your life, but yet progressive and loving enough to kind of find that person, reunite, and try to welcome them back into your life?
Well, first of all, I had no negative information about my father. I mean, it was neither good nor bad. I just didn't know. So I did not have any baggage. Not to mention, I had so much love and affection from the village community that helped to develop me in my neighborhood of Detroit, Michigan. And I grew up around, I like to say I grew up in limits, but I didn't necessarily grow up in chaos.
Mm.
So, I may have had my house raided by local drug dealers. I may have dealt with being jumped by gangs every day. I dealt with violence, but in my home, it wasn't necessarily a stream of chaos where I didn't have a consistent line of love and affection. That was a very key thing. And then also, you have to keep in mind that I didn't grow up with my mother either. My mother was in the army. She was not a part of my life at all, but my grandmother never allowed me to say anything negative about my mother or my father. So I was not allowed to harbor those feelings. And I actually channeled that energy I had into sports, into academics. So it was all really about myself. And I was just open and receptive to the opportunity of my mother coming into my life or my father coming into my life. And one thing you have to consider also is that in addition to me not having any real anger or any pain growing up as a kid, I met my father when I was 29 years old. So I was a lot more mature to handle the dynamics of that relationship than I would have been had I been 12 or 13. In addition to being in a household where I had a love deficit.
Mm.
And I think a lot of people, a lot of young people have deficit, affection deficit. That was not my case.
Terrell, let me stay with you for this particular question. Although you don't have bitterness or you don't harbor this resentment, which is a testament to God Almighty that you don't,
Yes, absolutely.
I'm sure you felt unprepared perhaps at some points in life. And if you did, when you got to those hurdles, how did you end up eventually getting over them?
That's a good question. I was not when I wasn't prepared for the man conversations, dealing with sex, dealing with girlfriends, completely unprepared. And I think that's something that affects me to this very day. I can tell you I have not had a consistent girlfriend or anything like that. And it has a lot to do with the fact that I didn't know the first things about I didn't have issues about women. I knew how to respect women, didn't necessarily know how to court them. When I was growing up, my grandmother's number one goal was not to have children when I was 18. Her mantra is no babies, no babies, no babies. So one second, no babies, no babies, no babies, no babies. I learned how to protect myself from being from the possibility of taking on a task that I was not responsible for. But I think that it delayed my development as far as understanding women. That to me, that's the number one thing that stands out in my mind. Going back to that, and I think also being with my father right now in the Bronx, the reason why I love New York so much and I consider this to be a lot more home for me than it is in Detroit was that it's my first experience of dealing with what that's come close to being a nuclear family. I had more family dinners, more family kind of get-togethers here in New York, here in the Bronx, than I ever had in Detroit, and I experienced a lot more stability dealing with aunties and with uncles, simply because of the dynamics that of the family of my other side of my family as opposed to my mother's side of my family, and it took me a while to get used to it because I was a loner. I was the only child, and I was not used to dealing with the disagreements that come with dealing with this uncle or that third uncle because I didn't have it growing up. I was just with my grandmother and that was it. So it's taken me a while to adjust to being a part of a family.
Feel free to tweet us at YLM Project, Your Life Matters, or log on to our Facebook page, facebook.com/YLM Project. Facebook.com/YLM Project. We're talking with three impressive young men. Terrell Starr, Associate Editor of News One, Jerry Barrow, Senior Editor of the Urban Daily, and Joe Gray, writer for News One. Joe, you've been sitting and listening to a lot of what's been going on thus far. I want to bring you back into the conversation to piggyback on something that Terrell said. And he talked about or alluded to the village. We all remember the West African proverb, it takes a village to raise a child. We also remember, importantly, there was an MSNBC conversation where DC Police Chief Kathy Lanier was saying that she didn't have a father to help raise her son. And then Howard University professor, chair of the Africana Studies Department, Dr. Greg Carr, immediately chimes in and says, where there's no man in the house, a man in the community will supplement that role. Joe, with your work mentoring the young men, I mean, ideally we could think that that's something that can be filled easily. But is it practical that men in the community can really fill a void, the emptiness, the absence of affection that Terrell alluded to, that fathers create, that absent fathers create?
I think it's a necessity for men to do that. What we find when we don't have responsible men in our communities, we find a void. I'll give you some examples of communities right here in New York, in Bedford Stuyvesant, in in Brownsville, you have high unemployment rates among African American men. You have high rates of violent crime. Um, there's all types of even health disparities that make it harder for men to fill that gap. What happens is, and we've seen studies of this over and over again, that you don't have someone who can be responsible, who is in a position to be responsible to provide that role, that male role model role. So what happens is young boys look to the streets for their role models. They look anywhere they can because they will look for role models, whether they can find them in their home, the streets. And if they're only available in the streets, then they'll take advantage of that. What are the streets going to find for them? The streets are going to find nothing but exploitation and really degradation. And it goes from generation to generation. It becomes cyclical. I was at Brooklyn's 81st precinct just the other weekend, taking our kids there for a tour of it, and we saw a wall of perps, people who had been arrested and everything. There was only one non-African American male on the board at all. This was as a result of this dearth of responsible male role models in the community. Our group is a small group, a small void. Uh, what we need to do really is make it so that there is an ability for men to actually do this, because there are men who want to do that. They just don't know how, and they don't have the tools. However, there are many groups that will aid them in doing those exact things.
Jerry, you're hearing about filling the void through different places. You're hearing about some situations where a community has to fill it through organizations like the Sigma Beta Club or other youth auxiliaries. You're hearing Terrell's story about how the community of love, even something we may misappropriate thinking love, but gangs in many ways fill that void. But for you to be a person who received it from your dad and now pass it down, you transfer that? Where do you see your place in that lineage of love, that we'll call it, from older generation down to your younger generation?
Oh, that's a great question. I think it's just being there as much as possible, listening, asking a lot of questions. Obviously, my kids are growing up in a time that's very different from mine, so I can't go in there with the same approach of being a kid from the 80s or the 70s. They've got the internet to contend with. They've got, like all the different types of electronics. Like one of the challenges now is that my son is 11, is giving him the independence. He's changing schools. We're sending him to a new school in September. So he asked about a Facebook page, and my wife and I said no, but you can have an email account so you can keep in touch with your friends. And it's like giving those small steps and just trying to understand that he while he is of me, he is not me. He is his own person. He and his sister are very different, and we try to give them the room and space to explore their personalities as much as possible. It helps a great deal that my wife and I, are of the same mindset when it comes to things.
Second, Terrell, you heard a lot of what he was saying, so I'm going to come back to you. We're going to go ahead and put it in the air from my lips to God's ears that you and a
Yes.
woman will make as you would like, and you too will become a father in due time. As
Yes.
such, from your experiences, do you think you pull more from what you did not have, did not learn, as to how you would move forward as a father? Or do you see yourself more so as saying, okay, I've seen these men in my circle, in my community. I like what they did. Let me pull from what I have from my own father and what I've seen from my peers. Where do you think your experiences will be more informed?
That's a good point. Both of them actually. With the first part, I think that I gained so much from my grandmother as far as values, just teaching me basics. My grandmother was someone who grew up in a small village in Greenwood, South Carolina. She had a third grade education, so she was a maid. She moved up to Detroit when she was a teenager, and she was a maid on the segregated part of the city. So she had the basics. She learned how to cook. She learned how to clean. Worked on the white side of town, and she transferred those skills to me. Now, had I had a father, I would have done the more quote unquote manly things, and I would have learned how to change a tire. I would learn how to change oil, things like that, or learn how to use tools. Where my grandmother gave me the survival tools that she learned in order to survive in the city. So those were things I think that, particularly the cooking part, are things that women would appreciate. But now going back to my father, I think one of the things that I gained from him was when he learned that I was his son, he didn't bulge. It didn't in fact matter that I was 29 years old. He saw me and he said, "This is my son." And I met him when I was doing my Fulbright at the very beginning. When I finished my Fulbright at the end of 2010, he said that I told him that I didn't have a job. I was looking for work. New York was my dream city. I was born in Detroit, but I felt like I was meant to be in New York. And this is my golden opportunity. He welcomed me into a small little apartment in the Bronx with open arms. And so him just automatically taking that responsibility with no questions, and he had very little to work with. He would give me a 20 here or $10 there, and if he had a little bit of extra money, he'd give me 50 there. It took me a year and a half to find work, but no matter how low I was, in my challenges to find work, he was always there for me. So I know that, well, I know what sacrifice looks like when you really love your kid, and that was a prime example for me. And I wanted to add on to some things that Joe was talking about in regards to, when having men in your life. Basically, when he was talking about health, and the importance of having a village, even though the father is not there. As a 14-year-old kid, I had a tendency of raiding the vending machine. I never had any weight or obesity issues, but I loved honey buns. There was a little tree called honey buns. I really loved them, and I ate them daily. My godmother, that's good for you, and just that word alone, I haven't had one since. I was 14 years old. I'm 34 years old right now. Going back to violence, when in my neighborhood, if you were not a member of a gang, you were a victim. And I think that I was a victim. I chose to be beat up, and I dealt with it a lot. I was beaten so bad one time that I had to go to the hospital after one of those attacks. So I understand that. And in addition to that, both of my uncles who were live-in uncles, they sold drugs. So I've been in situations where rival gangs would come in. I had 357s to the back of the head. I faced down all of them. When I was 12 years old, my grandmother gave me a 357 Magnum, and that was the whole thing, was to protect the house. If that's what you had to do, to me, that was my definition of manhood: protection. And if I had to use violence to do that, that's what I had to do. So just imagine being a teen and doing that. So it really configured what my definition of manhood is, and it was through violence, because when I saw violence. And when I grew up now as a 34-year-old kid, I really can appreciate why so many kids are challenged by the legal system, because I went, and if it wasn't for that village to pull me out of it, I really wouldn't know where I would be. I could easily see myself in jail. And the only thing, I think one of the things that saved me was the fact that I never took my gun out of the house, even though I had one. And even though I had access to one, I slept with a gun under my mattress. And I was given permission by my grandmother, if something pops off, to shoot, and ask questions later. So I think that, and that was my definition of manhood. And it was really until I graduated when I was in high school and I had that village community to fully embrace me, that I really understood that I had to take a step back from the gun or using violence in order to exemplify that manhood. But it was a very difficult and very painful process.
I do want to move along, Terrell, but before I do it, there are three things that you said that stuck out with me. And I think all three of them hopefully will bring a bit of levity to the conversation after the intense and graphic nature of your childhood that you described. First, you talked about being a 34-year-old kid. I'm sure there are tons of 30 and overs listening right now going, wait, I can be over 30 and be a kid still. Well, sign me up.
Well, yeah.
So I appreciate that. Another thing you talked about was changing oils. But from what I understand from my folks up in New York, you do a lot of that. You might change a lot of subway cards, but you don't do too much of changing oils because you guys aren't driving the most.
Yeah, well, in Detroit, you change oil because there's no public transportation. That's
Okay.
where I grew up as a kid. Now in New York, now it's different. I have a Metro card, so I don't have to worry about
Absolutely.
that.
And the last thing I think is really funny. There's an adage among the women in my family that says, teach a man to cook, because when a woman gets mad at a man, she keeps two things away from him. And if we teach him to cook, that at least solves one of them. They normally finish.
You know what my grandmother taught me, though? She taught me that if you know how to, I mean, you can cook for you. Well, this is the issue of patriarchy. She was someone.
Okay.
I guess she was, for lack of a better word, I guess she was a feminist, even though she didn't consider herself one. So her thing was, You don't need a woman to cook for you. And then two, if your woman doesn't know how to cook, you can cook for her. So that was what
There you go.
that was her idea of instilling manhood into me.
Joe, let me come to you. We haven't heard from you for a little bit. You still have to teach these young men nuances of manhood, right? Just don't get locked up, do good in school. It's talking about how to respect women. It's talking about how to embrace their strengths and weaknesses. How do you approach that?
It's an educational process. I'm learning as they learn. Because I've had the kids that I've had from about say age 9. A lot of them are 14. So I'm growing with them. So teaching them the nuances of manhood means having them show them how to be a man the way my dad showed him how to be a man, the way his dad showed him how to be a man. Okay. Um, there's a whole man up thing that is controversial. People complain about it, but I think that really that just says be resilient through adversity. Don't necessarily cry when you skin your knee and everything. Just go get some Bactine, put it on it, and keep riding your bike. Things like that. And anything. I'm not saying that that's exclusive to men, but that's something that I think that we have to teach our young boys. That you do. Our society has become so hooked on things like social media, and I know we're broadcasting through social media now. um, and
I was,
things
Joe, I was just about to say, hi, Pet. Hi, Pot. I'm Kettle. Nice to meet you.
that exactly. But it's a thing of there's so much in society right now that's teaching our young men and everything not to deal with their problems, to run behind things and things like that. And I like to teach the young guys, listen, success means facing your problems, facing your fears, and finally getting over them. Because if you don't, someone will take advantage of that situation, and you'll be left sort of hanging and things like that. So, I also want to allude to something Terrell was talking about, which kind of connects to this to piggyback. Violence in the community. Terrell and I both grew up in Detroit. He grew up in a neighborhood not far from my own, and a lot of violence too. I came up in the early days of crack, and those days were days where we saw a lot of violence that the community just didn't know what to do with. And a lot of young men did not know how to deal with the sudden rampant violence that we were witnessing. And it goes on to this day and everything. And it's a thing of where young guys think of answers as guns. And the challenge is not so much to teach them to deal with violence, but how to avoid violence completely in their minds. Think of alternatives to fighting. And if you're gonna fight, at least fight with your fists, not with a gun and everything. So many people are willing to use a gun as answers because that makes you judge, jury, and executioner for that 4 5 seconds and everything. But after it's over, now you're facing charges. But our young men aren't thinking that way. How we got to this point has a lot of answers, and there's no one way that we got into this. And I don't think there's any one way that we get out of it and everything. But to recognize that there's a violence problem that comes in the very culture and psychology of young men is the first step.
Jerry, I see that we have you back. I don't want to continue with Joe's offering. It was very valuable. He talked about how he's learning on the job with the young men that he's mentoring. But Jerry, you're learning on the job because this is someone who's in your home.
Right.
So if you can't go ahead and chime in with us the nuance of teaching manhood.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
All right, great. No, what I was saying before is a lot of it is by example. My father, I learned my manhood cues from my father because he cooked, he cleaned, he worked 6 days a week. So it wasn't so much that he sat down and this is how you're supposed to act. This is what you're supposed to do. When it came to women, yes, he said, you're supposed to do this. This is appropriate. This is not appropriate. However, I learned the most by just watching how he interacted with my mother, how he handled himself, how he carried himself, and I try to do the same thing with my son. I'm training him now to care about his appearance. He's really this free spirit. He'll wear stripes and polka dots together and not care. And I'm trying to coax him into, caring a little bit more about, comb your hair or, make sure you're brushing your teeth, stuff like that, and I don't want it to be something where someone has to embarrass him for him to learn the lesson. But that's really what it's about. Being there, at least for me, for the examples that were set are going to mean so much more than anything you can tell them, because I can tell my son not to do something until the cows come home, but then he's going to look at me and see what I do, and that's going to sit with him more than anything that I'm going to tell him. So I have to be very careful about how I speak to his mother, for example. That's going to train him on how to interact with women. How I speak to his sister. I tell him we don't hit women. He when he and his sister get into little things and he starts to get frustrated, I said no. I said we, not you. I said we don't hit women. You find another way to express yourself or your anger. And conversely, we try to, the cult of affection that Terrell alluded to is definitely alive and well. I hug my son every chance I get. My father hugged me. Even as I got older, I'd get that little forehead kiss or rub. My father, so I have no hair now. My father used to love to rub my head. When I was sitting there doing my homework, he would just come over and just rub my head. That was his way of just letting me know that he's there, and if you need anything, come talk to me. And I just try to do the same. It's not, nothing can really prepare you, to speaking to the whole preparation, because every child is going to be different. But you can just have patience and just love them. Really, really understand that they're part of you.
Jerry, let me follow back up with you real quick. As a dad, how do you balance putting your hands under them to metaphorically catch them when they fall,
Mm.
and also sometimes letting it go because you want those adverse experiences to build character, but you don't want to expose your child to anything, God forbid, awful? How do you balance
Oh
that?
my. It's hard. It's really hard. Right now he wants more independence. He wants to be able to go to the store. The first time he went to the store by himself, I didn't let him know, but I was standing on the porch watching him go down the block the whole time until I couldn't see him anymore and turn in the corner. And just the notion that when I was his age, I was busing from Flatbush to Bay Ridge to go to school every day. And I couldn't imagine sending him out to travel for an hour on a bus at his age now. It would terrify me. I don't know how my parents did it. But at some point, I'm going to have to start letting, because before I know it, he's going to be in high school, and the worst thing you can do is have them be too sheltered. You don't want him to. I don't want to set him loose on Manhattan, and he doesn't know one way from the other. So I actually took him out a couple of weeks ago, and even though we live out in Rosedale by the Long Island Railroad, we hopped on the subway, and I said, "This is how you ride the train. This is how you get your Metro card. This is how he's got to learn that." And I can't shelter him from it forever. You know.
Absolutely. These have been all great points, and we're very, very thankful. If you're just logging on lately, just let you know who we're talking with. Terrell Starr. He's an associate editor of News One. We're talking with Jerry Barrow. He's a senior editor of the Urban Daily. And we're also conversing with Joe Gray, a contributing writer for News One. Feel free to hit us, hashtag YLM Project. Also get us at YLM Project on Twitter or facebook.com/YLM Project. Fellas, our time is coming to an end, and although I'm enthralled, and as my lips to God's ears, not yet father, excited about these lessons I've learned from those who did not have theirs and those who are already, I'm going to ask us for some final thoughts. Joe, I'm going to come to you first. Thought is, I don't want to grandiose what can we take from this, what should we do, how should folks go, but more pointedly from your experiences, if there are women or their uncles or their villages listening, and they want to plug in their young people, particularly a young man, into mentoring groups, networks, outfits that can help and strengthen their village and enrich their young person's lives in a manly way. Because there's sometimes some places that women, unfortunately, as much as we love our sisters, can't fill that void. Can you offer us some resources?
There are several resources. There are many resources in our own communities. You can start with the Boy Scouts. You can start with girls clubs. There are so many places that you can go that will help out. There are police athletic PAL organizations, Pop Warner leagues, things like that really key boys in to just mentorships and having just good people around them. Period. There are also other groups specifically, like 100 Black Men. That'll be at 100blackmen.org and everything. That's one great one. The Good Men Project as well. They really take a very wide and broad look at how to bring young men together with role models. Also, the Our Own Sigma Club, which you'll pretty much find it in any city where there are chapters of Phi Beta Sigma, and all BGLO, Black Letter organizations, have these groups alongside them. So if you're out there in the community and you're looking for mentorship for men, for men, for your young men, you can find it as easy as Googling and everything. All you have to do is really reach out. And there are guys out there who are willing to reach back out to you and embrace your son with love.
Joe, thank you so much for that contribution and conversation. We appreciate it. We appreciate the work you're doing as a man without children, fill that communal void so no man walks the face of this earth, or at least walks the face of the neighborhoods that you live in, and can say they don't have male influences. Thank you for that. Terrell, I want to come to you because, brother, your experiences have been so varied, and through it all, you've been cracking us up and being the base of all the jokes. And one would not think that you would be the funny man through all of this, but give your lived experience. If this is replayed for someone who's not living in and around their father, or with a heavy paternal presence, what encouraging word of advice can you give to help shape them through their journey as they mature into manhood, and finally can you offer them once they do reconnect with that paternal figure?
Well, one thing I definitely have to say is just have your heart open and really be receptive to a new opportunity. I never thought that my relationship with my father would be as wonderful as it is. I originally thought I didn't need my father until I actually needed him. And particularly when I was finished with Grant in Ukraine, I felt like academically I earned full scholarships for undergraduate and grad school. I mean, I have 3 degrees. I never took out a loan. I never filled out the application. My grandmother died when I was 18 years old, and I was homeless at one point. I went from house to house at one point. So, but I always seemed to be able to manage it. And even as I was going through my 20s, I always believed that I would be okay, and I really didn't need anyone. But coincidentally, when I finished my Fulbright, I couldn't find work. My economic or financial stream just collapsed, and I didn't have anything. And my father, right at the right moment when I finished that Fulbright, waited for me at JFK Airport. He picked me up. First time I saw my father, brought me into New York, made me, all the New York tendencies that I have, I gained from him, the hustle, the grind, and everything. Got it from my father, and it was almost like I was a teenager again, because I just learned the ropes of this city and now learned how to navigate it in a way that I never could have had I done it by myself. And as far as meeting that for a young person, being their father for the first time, I would simply say just give that person a chance to be themselves. Don't listen to anyone else's interpretation of who your father is, because I have a brother and I have a sister, and both have different interpretations of who he is. And while I respect that, I rely on interpretation of who he is, and that has been the best primer for our relationship, and it's been a very fruitful one. He's going to be moving down to South Carolina with his wife, and I'm actually going to miss him. We get along more like older brother, younger brother, more so than father, but it's been a great experience, and I think I am a better person because he's in my life.
Terrell, undoubtedly we are better people because you've shared your story. We thank you for that, brother, very seriously. And Brother Jerry, man of Alpha Phi Alpha, only because you guys were founded do you have to go last. That's the only reason to make you go last. But I do want to get you, and I want your final thoughts specifically to be biggest challenge, biggest fear, biggest joy. Because those young men, maybe mid to late 20s, early 30s, mid to late 30s, married, successful, they're cheesing ear to ear waiting to become a daddy. And they have no clue that blank is coming. And we need you to fill in that blank. And then once you hear the I don't know what out of them, I want you to go ahead and give him
Wow.
the pat on the head that you told us your daddy used to give him. Say it's going to be okay, and give us the biggest joy.
I mean, the thing about being a father that hits you is that your internal compass shifts. Your whole life, you're walking around thinking about, I gotta eat, I'm hungry, I need to sleep, I need to do this, and at that very instant, your internal compass points towards someone else, and it can scare the hell out of you because now you're responsible for their very being in existence. However, when you interact with that child and you see how grateful they are for everything you're doing, it's all worth it. It's all worth it. When you see how they grow and how they expand and the thoughts they come up with. My son walks around with a notebook filled with business plans and menus and recipes for things he wants to do with his life. And it's like, how can you not be a part of that? Like, how can you not encourage that? So the fear gets, subsided when you see that in the children. But however, I am scared for how he's gonna how society will treat him. When the Trayvon Martin, when the Zimmerman verdict came down, I wrote an essay. What do I tell my son? Because I felt like he should be able to walk outside in a hoodie if he feels like it. At least that's how I felt before. And then I was like, you know what? If it keeps him alive, put on a sweater, put on a t-shirt, things like that. Those are the fears I still carry with me. But, as far as advice, I don't know, just be there as much as possible. That'll make up for any, it's on the job learning. So every answer you're gonna have, every question you're gonna have will be answered when you're there. I promise you. When you're holding them and you're looking at them, you're questioning yourself, the answers will come. That much I can tell you.
And that is a perfect way, an optimistic way to conclude this conversation. You all have been watching or listening to Your Life Matters interactive chat on fatherhood by Shending. I'm Ray Baker. The platform had cool features that you guys had an opportunity to enjoy. You could click raise your hand, but we also know that this can live in perpetuity on the internet. So feel free to tweet us at YLM Project or log on to our Facebook page, Facebook.com, YLM Project. Terrell Starr, Jerry Barrow, Joe Gray, I am eternally grateful for what it is you all have offered to us today. And in parting, let us remember the words of the Yoruba proverb, that if we stand tall, it is because we stand on the backs of those who came before us. Now, as we exit, a video about fatherhood. Be blessed.
Having a father that you can call at 2 o'clock in the morning, 6 o'clock in the morning. Today I did. I called him at 6 in the morning. But really, having someone that extends themselves to you and makes everything, that's the thing about both of my parents. They are my best friends, period, point blank. So if I'm a young person and I'm talking to my parents about the things I want to do in life, I'm avoiding a lot of things that I don't have to go through trying to figure it out on my own. I think that's part of why I've had a pretty great experience in the music industry. 3 things I love about my dad: his sense of humor, his wittiness, always coming up with a phrase, and the fact that I can depend on him for anything. He's my rock.